Hello everyone, this is your friend Shinobi Nexus 2.0. Welcome back to the channel. Enjoy the fanfic. And let's begin. What if Naruto and Ino woke up together after one wild night? Part 2. So Ino-chan, big date tonight. Mio Yamanaka stood at the entrance to her daughter's room, watching on in bemusement as her only offspring hovering before the bed in her undergarments. While her daughter was rather well acquainted with the latest fashion trends that seemed to take off in a different direction every other season or so, the girl was rarely seen spending much time being indecisive on what to actually wear. It wasn't just pride as a mother speaking when Mio said that her daughter looked good in just about anything. Ino was giving herself a hard stare in front of the full-length mirror situated in the room, frowning at the slightly haggard appearance of her reflection. Spending all day underground was not good for her complexion. Black or blue? The younger girl directed the question at her mother, who was still observing her daughter amusedly from the shadow of the doorway. Well, that depends, Ino-chan. Are you going out with a friend tonight or trying to bring a man home? Chuckling at scandalized expression reflected in the mirror, the older Yamanaka stepped up behind her daughter to peer at the two outfits that was the source of conflict. One was a stylish floor-sweeping open-backed evening gown that was a brilliant sapphire. The delicate fabric was dotted with sparkling gems at the chest, showing off just enough cleavage to entice, but not so much as to scream for attention. The blue material seemed to thin out in layers as it went down the body until it was practically transparent at the legs, allowing a bit of skin to show behind the translucent cloth. The fine silky garment would not have looked out of place in the court of the feudal lord. The second choice was a body-hugging black cut that accentuated every tantalizing womanly curve. The soft silk-like material managed to hide everything and nothing at the same time. The elastic fabric allowed for not a single scrap of cloth to hang, as it would mold tightly to the contour of the wearer. It was the perfect illustration of the phrase, "little black dress," and left nothing to the imagination. The stylish black dress was cut off right before the knees, showing plenty of leg, but falling just short of being appalling. The designer managed to skillfully turn up the Innis factor on the chic threads without abusing the skin card. Without a doubt, the dress would turn heads and send tongues wagging wherever its owner walked. The matriarch pursed her lips as she considered the two exquisite examples of her daughter's fine taste in fashion, marveling at how quickly her Ino-chan had grown up. On one hand, she wanted her daughter to be safe and not send off the wrong signal to the boy that was taking her out tonight. But at the same time, Mio herself was a woman and understood all too well her young daughter's desire to flaunt her feminine qualities in order to attract the attention of a man. The internal struggle between mother and woman swirled like a storm, but after a long pause, Mio came to her decision. "You said he's coming to pick you up tonight?" the older woman asked her daughter curiously. Ino was no stranger to dating, but she had never brought a boy over to their house before. No doubt her husband's fearsome reputation as a mind reader working in IT, well known for their liberal dispensing of torture, had something to do with that. "Yeah, he said he'd be coming by around 7 o'clock. Ino glanced at her clock and bit her lip nervously when she saw that it was 5 minutes away from the appointed time. Mio pulled up the dark dress and gave it an appraising once-over. "Well, I think if the boy is brave enough to come face your father, then he deserves a little something special." Ino stared pensively at the dark dress, weighing the pros and cons of donning the more provocative outfit. On one hand, she would look extremely nice and more than likely blow poor Naruto's mind out of the water. His reaction alone would be worth it, but was that what she wanted to do? She had bought that dress because it had looked stunning on her. However, Ino had never had a chance to wear it before, since she had never wanted to gain the kind of attention that dress would bring. This wasn't just a tail party dress. It was an open invitation to try to take me home so you can remove it kind of dress. Well, no point in buying it if I was never going to wear it, she thought sheepishly. Taking the midnight hued dress from her mother, she quickly slipped into the material, reveling in the gentle caress of the wispy silken fabric against her skin. The cool glossy material raised goosebumps where textile touched skin, but she looked undeniably striking, the dark contrast bringing out her hair and eyes. As she pulled on the black 4-inch stilettos bought specifically for the outfit, her mother walked up behind her and began to carefully coil her long blonde hair up. Straightening, the younger Yamanaka watched her mother work away at her hair in the mirror, skillfully weaving the long strands into a beautiful work of art complete with a pair of silver chopsticks engraved with miniature dragon carvings. It had been years since her mother had helped her put her hair up. Once Ino had been accepted into the ninja academy, she had insisted that she was old enough to take care of her own grooming, and her mother had accepted that without a fuss. The blonde girl hadn't realized how much she missed this bonding moment until she was sitting there under her mother's tender ministrations again. "So tell me about this boy. What is he like?" "He's an idiot," Ino blurted out immediately before she could even really think about it. Her mother laughed at her response, casting a critical eye at her daughter's reflection before making micro-adjustments here and there. "All men are idiots, Ino-chan," she responded absent-mindedly. "What's his name?" "Naruto. Uzumaki Naruto." Ino didn't miss the momentary pause in her mother's hands, but the older woman continued on without comment, leaving Ino to stew in her own thoughts. "Like I said, he's an idiot, an attention-seeking loudmouth who was dead last in our graduating year." Ino paused as she reflected on what she knew about him. "I guess that's who he was anyways. A couple of years ago he left with Jiraiya-sama and trained with him for 3 years. He came back a year ago, but he's different now, more reserved and thoughtful." "Sounds like he grew up," commented the older woman thoughtfully as she turned to eye her daughter's makeup kit. "I guess. It's weird though. He used to be all dead set on Sakura, but out of the blue he decides to ask me out," said Ino with a frown. Well, maybe not entirely out of the blue given what had taken place the night before he had expressed his interest in her. Ino still didn't know how to feel about the 180 her fellow blonde had done. He had been gone for the better part of 3 years, and since his return no one had seen him pester Sakura for a date. But given the amount of time those two spent together, people had simply assumed they had quietly gotten together and wasn't too keen on letting others know about it. It wasn't so uncommon in their field of work. Loved ones were a weakness that could be used against a shinobi. "Sakura-chan?" inquired Mio in surprise. "My, you two seem to always cross paths in your love interests." The young mink walker felt her face flush slightly at her mother's observation. "He's not a love interest. We're just going out 'cause I didn't have any other plans." After a night of fantastic, she added silently with an internal wince. "Oh, is that why you were agonizing over what to wear?" teased the clan matriarch. "Because the last few times you went out with a boy you just threw on the first thing you grabbed from the closet if I remember right." Ino looked away, embarrassed that her mother had noticed. It was true that she had probably spent more time worrying about her appearance for this one night than all the other ones she'd been on combined. For her prior dates she had the unshakable belief that she would look good in anything she put on. Hell, they should be thankful for her presence, let alone judge her for her appearance. But for tonight Ino didn't want to just look good, she wanted to look fantastic. Why that was the case she was still puzzling through in her head. Mother and daughter fell silent as Mio carefully applied a minimal amount of makeup to Ino's face. The blonde girl had never particularly cared for using makeup, but she kept some in her room for those rare occasions where she did need a brief touch-up in appearance. Those occasions were rare and far between. A light touch of foundation, followed by some eyeliner and a light application of lip gloss was all that was needed. Perfect. "I don't think that poor boy will be able to keep his eyes off you tonight, Ino-chan," said Mio in a self-satisfied manner. Turning to examine her reflection, Ino couldn't disagree. She looked damn hot if she had to say so herself. Picking up the black purse where she kept some money and identification, Ino twirled once in front of the mirror to make sure nothing was out of place. Nodding in satisfaction, the kunoichi proceeded to slip a few blades into areas where they would not be too noticeable. Not that she was afraid that Naruto was going to try anything that would require her to defend herself, but it was just good practice to always be armed. Smiling at her mother's approving look, she drew a breath and prepared to head downstairs where no doubt her father was busy burning a hole into Naruto's head for daring to even set foot into the house, let alone take out his little princess. Her mother's hand on her shoulder stopped her descent and she turned a curious look to the woman's rather serious face. Ino-chan, do you have some condoms in your purse? The blonde bombshell felt her jaw drop as she stared back at her mother in disbelief, uncertain if she had heard correctly. What? Why would I need that? Ino spluttered with heat blossoming on her cheeks. I've seen that boy, laughed Mio with sly knowing gleam in her eyes. A strapping young lad like that isn't in demand for his ability to spout poetry. You're a grown woman who can make her own decisions, regardless of what your father might believe. If you do decide to stay for the night with Naruto-kun, I want you to be safe. Now if you don't have any protection, I'll go get some from my room. Ew mom, I did not need to know that, yelled Ino, the volume of her voice fueled by mortification. And that is not happening between me and Naruto. Again, she amended guiltily. Her mother raised both hands up in an appeasing manner to calm her daughter. Well, you're a smart girl, Ino-chan, I just want you to be happy. Though take some advice from your mother, I would make my decision on whether you like him or not quickly. A man like that won't be on the market for long. Attraction is a funny thing. When you have it you might not care for it, but when you lose it you suddenly crave it. Sakura-chan might change her mind about Naruto-kun if you remain indecisive for too long. Ignoring the way her heart had plummeted into her stomach at the mention of Sakura, Ino rolled her eyes at her mother. Hell, if Sakura wants to take this headache out of my hands I'd gift wrap him with a bow tie for her, she grumbled half-heartedly. Shaking her head with an amused smile, the older woman shook her head and ushered her daughter towards the stairwell to their two-storied home. Whatever you say, Ino-chan, let's go meet that man of yours before your father figures out where he wants to hide the body. The two women descended into the living room expecting to find a frigid atmosphere with a glaring Inoichi and cowering Naruto set apart as far as physically possible. Instead, what they found was the two men conversing inaudibly about something in the kitchen area, two bottles of beer opened before them. Naruto was saying something while repeatedly making a triangle figure with his hands for some unknown reason as Inoichi looked on intently with an intrigued expression on his face. The two women shared a stupefied look as the Yamanaka clan head burst out into rueful laughter while shaking his head. Clapping his hand onto the younger man's shoulder, Inoichi leaned forward, making a circular motion with his finger while replying back, causing Naruto to crack up as well. Mio steered her befuddled daughter over to the two oblivious men, clearing her throat to get their attention. Inoichi turned and his mouth fell open when he set eyes on his daughter, having rarely seen her dress up for anything. Ino, however, only had eyes for her date for the night. She was pleased to note that Naruto had a stunned expression on his face, as if someone had told him that Ichiraku's ramen was closing down for good. Oh yeah, she thought with an internal fist pump, so worth it. After a moment of muteness, Naruto finally seemed to have found his tongue again. His face morphed into a calm smile before stretching into that irresistible grin of his which set off a similar one on Ino's face as well. Wow, he breathed, eyes lit up. Ino-chan, you look gorgeous. Blushing self-consciously at the blatant honesty in his voice, Ino averted her eyes in embarrassment. She was in for a surprise when he reached behind the counter and pulled up a batch of a dozen white roses with a single red one centered in the beautiful formation. The dark ruby stood out like a beacon against the field of gentle white surrounding it, accentuating the beauty of the single red rose in the skillfully fashioned bouquet. Gasping in delight, Ino took the flowers from him and gave them a brief sniff before handing them over to her mother, who had already retrieved a vase. The analogy he was trying to draw with his offering was not lost on her. It hadn't escaped her mother either from the pleased expression seen on her face. Ino felt herself melt a little on the inside at the wordless compliment he had just handed her. Sometimes the best compliments were the unspoken ones. You didn't buy that from a competitor, did you? She joked even as her happy smile refused to die down. Naruto chuckled and scratched at the back of his head. There's no good answer to that, so I'm going to keep quiet. Smart move, she laughed. Thanks for the roses. Breaking out of her own internal delight to take in his appearance, Ino couldn't help but marvel at how neatly her fellow blonde cleaned up. She had never seen him outside of his gaudy orange jumpsuits when they were younger, and while he had added a lot more black to his ensemble now that he was older, he was still rarely seen wearing anything but one of his signature orange trimmed jackets. It was practically his trademark by now, something that was in fact noted in his bingo book entry. For their night out, the blonde had opted to go for a less traditional outfit. Simple slacks ran all the way down his long legs to a pair of expensive-looking dark leather shoes that had been polished meticulously to a fine pearly sheen. A dark sleek suit jacket hung snuggly over his well-built figure, framing a crisp white shirt that he kept casually unbuttoned at the collar to expose just enough flesh to hint at the lithe rippling chest muscle hidden behind the cloth. He had foregone the leaf headband, allowing his naturally spiky blonde hair to flow backwards in a messy but appropriate look given his informal approach to dressing up. The dark green gem that was always on his person hung from his neck like a blinking star, adding to the slight rebellious air about him given his flouting of convention on what was acceptable for formal wear. But she had to admit, he looked damn good doing it. You're welcome. His charming smile was quickly diverted to Mio, who had returned from having put away the roses onto a table kept in the hallway for such displays. And you must be Mio-san. I guess I have you to thank for raising such a lovely daughter. Mio laughed and gave Naruto's shoulder a playful swat. I'd like to think I did most the hard work. Exchanging a quick handshake, the two broke apart as Inoichi cleared his throat. Turning, Naruto gave an apprehensive grin at the stern look he was receiving from the older man. Now I like you, Naruto, began Ino's father steadily, but if I catch even a hint that you're not treating my daughter right, well. The older man trailed off with narrowed eyes before making the signature Yamanaka mind-delving seal. Mio gave him a good whack across the back, dissolving the rather intimidating air he had been putting off when he let out a yelp. Oh, leave him alone, you big brute, scolded the Yamanaka matriarch playfully. Ignore him, Naruto-kun. You and Ino-chan go have fun tonight. The rather murderous look that Inoichi was sending Naruto implied he wanted them to have anything but fun. The older man quickly found himself being pushed out of the living room by his wife, who was telepathically threatening him with a dry spell for the history books if he didn't leave the young couple alone. Pinching the bridge of her nose in humiliation at her parents' antics, Ino opened her eyes again to catch Naruto giving her body a bold unhidden once-over now that her family was no longer present. The Mind Walker smirked as blue orbs finally finished their slow greedy crawl back up to her eyes. So he wasn't entirely a gentleman after all. Well, Ino was aware of that already, given some of the unspeakable things he had done to her that still had her blushing a week later. So where are we going? Seeing as you're all dressed up fancy, I'm guessing we're not going to Ichiraku's, she snarked, falling into the easy routine of ribbing the former class dunce. The offended look on his face prompted Ino to burst out laughing. Oh come on, Ino-chan, Naruto whined. You didn't really think I'd take you to Ichiraku's, did you? Well, he huffed and crossed his arms, pouting childishly. Yeah, well, maybe we will go there. Allowing her giggles to subside, Ino stuck out her tongue mischievously at her fellow blonde. Yeah, well, maybe I'll just stay here then. Snorting, the blonde male stuck his nose up arrogantly and gave a rather impressive sneer back at her. Like you could resist me. The two broke down snickering and spent a good minute swallowing back fits of giggles before calming down again. So where are we going? Ino probed curiously as he held the door open for her. To Kyoto, he replied easily while scanning the front porch of her home. Drawing up to a halt at his reply, she gave him an incredulous look. Kyoto was a neighbor city in Fire Country near Konoha, completely run by civilians unlike the Leaf Village. Due to the lack of military leaders in the city, there was a lot more entertainment and restaurants to be found as it was primarily a tourist attraction. It wasn't a bad place for a date, but the city also happened to be a good hour away even for a shinobi moving at a steady pace. Naruto, Ino began slowly. Kyoto's like at least 20 miles away. Yeah, it is, he replied distractedly while continuing to scan the crowd of people headed for an evening out. Tapping a heeled foot, Ino crossed her arms with a glare. And how exactly are we supposed to get there? I'm not exactly in running footwear, and even if I were, I'm not running to another city just for a date. Naruto turned around and took one of her hands in his with a gentle tug. Ino felt her anger cool at the kind smile directed at her, finding her eyes captivated by his alluring baby blues. Damn him, how did he manage to manipulate her emotions so easily? Hey, trust me a little, yeah. The gentle request was punctuated with an equally soft squeeze from his large warm hands. Giving a huff to shake off the swarm of butterflies that had magically manifested in her stomach, Ino watched curiously as he frowned at the luxurious silver timepiece on his wrist. It seemed he had something planned after all. Okay, so what are we waiting for then? She asked impatiently. As if to answer her question, her ears caught the sound of loud neighing and the deep rhythmic rumble of wheels broken by the almost silent creak of turning spokes. Stepping straight out of a fairy tale, a majestic quartet of snow-white horses turned around the street corner, carrying with them an elegant carriage that practically screamed royalty with its elegant design. People hurriedly moved out of the way of the important-looking carriage, breaking up into whispers as the vehicle pulled up to the Yamanaka home. Ino couldn't help but gasp as the massive beasts pulled up to a stop before them. Unbidden, her hand reached out to caress one of the well-groomed animal's silky mane. The lead horse snorted nervously and pranced a little at her approach, but calmed at her soothing touch. The chatter of the crowd that had built up in the background fell on deaf ears as Ino delighted at the regal presence of the stallion she was caressing. So sorry, shouted the stately-looking older man in the dark kimono who jumped off the driver's seat. Got a bit turned around. I hope you weren't waiting too long. Naruto rubbed the back of his head nervously, but laughed it off. Well, I was more worried you wouldn't show up, Nagata-san. I go where the boss says, replied the driver simply as he opened the carriage door with a graceful sweep of his hands. And tonight he said you're the boss. Ino couldn't help but feel a burst of excitement as Naruto gestured for her to head in before him. Carefully maneuvering up the steps, she was greeted with the splendid interior, a spacious two-seater bound in the finest leather along with a champagne holder and various other snack foods that looked abhorrently expensive. Plopping herself down and noting how it felt like she had just sat down on a cloud, Ino couldn't help the giddy sensation ballooning inside her as she took a glance at the wine selection on board. There must have been at least a dozen brands from all over the elemental nations, all well stocked and without a price label to make her feel guilty about guzzling them. Her expectations for the evening had already been shattered in the first 5 minutes. Talk about setting the bar high. How in the world did you afford to rent a carriage? She asked in wonderment as Naruto seated himself across from her. Their vehicle started off with a low rumble quickly drowned out by the clopping of horses' hooves. Through the small window Ino spotted the surprised faces of her parents watching from the living room window. Returning their hesitant wave, she gave them a bright smile of reassurance. Oh, I know a guy who knows a guy, Naruto answered evasively. Grabbing a bottle at random, he examined the label with a critical eye before nodding with satisfaction at what he found there. Skillfully popping the cork with little effort, Naruto searched through another drawer looking for something to pour the fine liquor into. Accepting the bubbling glass from her date, Ino gave the vintage an experimental sniff before sipping. Enjoying the way the carbonated quality clashed with the light fruity taste, she smacked her lips in a rather unladylike fashion before turning her attention to the compartment on the side of her seat. Well, you'll have to introduce me to this guy then. Ino exclaimed happily as she rifled through the snack drawer. Greedily snapping up a package of chocolate-covered strawberries hidden between some gourmet confectionaries, the mind-walker let loose a moan of ecstasy as the bitter cocoa mixed beautifully with the sweet zesty juices of the fresh just-picked berries that had been harvested at the zenith of the season. Offering the package to her partner in crime, who was busily emptying a bag of what appeared to be pretzel wedges filled with peanut butter, Ino stuffed another of the mouthwatering fruit morsels into her mouth. She had to fight back another groan of pleasure as her taste buds flooded her reward pathways with dopamine. This was almost as good as. Almost. So how am I doing so far? Questioned Naruto cheekily. Oh, I don't know, drawled Ino. She toyed with another strawberry, enjoying the way his eyes hungrily traced the sensual movement against her lips. You're doing okay so far, I suppose. Okay, he squawked indignantly. Who'd you go out with before? The Fire Lord's son. Shuddering slightly at the image of the overweight pudgy pig-like noble that she unfortunately had to protect for one of her missions, Ino stuck her tongue out at Naruto. I happen to have very refined tastes. Rigot. Refined. Might want to wipe off the chocolate from your mouth before you say that, princess, he chided her teasingly. Ino blushed and grabbed a napkin to dab at the corner of her mouth only to find there was nothing there. Tossing the balled-up napkin at a laughing Naruto, she followed up with the first thing within reach, which happened to be her strawberry package. Naruto snatched the improvised projectile from the air, helping himself to 2 berries at once. Hey, Ino whined, those are mine. Come get them then, he taunted while shoveling down another pair of the chocolate-covered snacks, quickly decreasing the size of the already dwindling bag. Lunging across the space between them, Ino made a wild grab for the sack of strawberries only to find them outside her reach as Naruto held them over his head. Cussing his parentage, she hopped onto his lap to gain the leverage necessary to reach her target, fingers scrabbling wildly to snatch back her prize. Ino fell into a paralyzing fit of giggles as Naruto used his free hands to tickle her sides, tears springing to her eyes as he mercilessly assaulted her weak points. No. Stop it, she shrieked as she laughed hysterically. Now giving up on getting her precious back, she tried to squirm off his lap to get away from his searching hands, but found herself trapped in his grip when he brought down his raised arm to hold her in place. Seeing no recourse for escape, Ino fought back the only way she could. By tickling back twice as hard. The 2 blondes struggled against each other, trying to trap the other's hand while keeping one of their own free to attack. After a couple of minutes of back and forth, they finally called a breathless truce when they almost accidentally knocked over Naruto's glass of wine. Capitalizing on Naruto's distraction from keeping the liquid from spilling, Ino snatched back the bag of berries with a triumphant cry. Ha! I win! She gloated. In your face, Uzumaki! Said Uzumaki chuckled and wrapped an arm around her waist, pulling her closer to him so that their faces were inches apart. I guess you do, Ino-chan, he whispered huskily. Their faces were so close Ino's nose could pick up the whiff of mint on his breath. She was momentarily overcome with the urge to find out what brand he used by tasting his mouth. Feeling the gooseflesh break out across her arms, the kunoichi fought down a shiver. Staring into the crystal lakes, gazing serenely back at her, Ino swallowed ineffectually while running her tongue across her suddenly very dry lips. Yeah, she whispered back breathlessly, unconsciously leaning forward. The soft smile adorning his youthful features turned into a wicked smirk upon seeing her reaction. Naruto pulled back from Ino, leaving her mortified at her own subconscious reaction to his proximity. Trying to ignore a feeling of disappointment seems to have become a thing for Ino lately. Sliding hurriedly off his lap, and feeling a slight pang of regret at the loss of close contact, Ino decided to stay on his side of the bench. Snatching up glass of wine he had rescued, she emptied it with one swig before shooting her date a haughty look as if that was her response to his challenge. So tell me about yourself, Ino-chan, Naruto said as he turned slightly face her, resting his back against the wall next to the window frame. Leaning back against her side of the carriage, Ino returned his curious look while propping her bare feet on his lap. Her shoes had fallen off during their little wrestling match over the now empty bag of berries and she hadn't bothered putting them back on. Huh, like what? We're on a date to get to know each other, Naruto pointed out dryly with a roll of his eyes. You know, like your likes, dislikes, hobbies, dreams for the future. What is this, like our first team meeting or something? Ino quipped while tossing the empty strawberry bag into a waste bin in a tiny compartment that retracted into the floor of the carriage. Rich people had the neatest toys. Fine, I guess I can run with that. I like watching the sun rise, I always get this feeling of hope in that. I like peanut butter. I don't like bugs, and I hate that stupid cat the Fire Lord's wife owns. My hobbies are working with flowers. I like how calm I feel when I'm putting together a bouquet or tending to the gardens. Oh, and I also like shopping, duh. For the future, well, I'm hoping to find someone to fall in love with and settle down. That and becoming head of the intelligence department. Seeing Naruto's deadpan expression, Ino crossed her arms defensively. What? Don't judge. Just having a flashback to Team 7's first meeting, he replied with a snicker. Well, why don't you tell me about yourself then? Ino huffed. Raising Ino's feet up with one hand, the blonde male briefly crossed his own legs before gently propped hers back on his lap while considering his reply. Well, as you've learned, I like to cook and I like to think I'm pretty good at it too. I also like to write, something I picked up from Jiraiya while I was traveling. Seeing the narrowed eyes of his date, he quickly backpedaled. Not his kind of writing, of course. Oh yeah? Asked Ino after she finally relented her glare. What do you write about then? Action-adventure type novels actually, he chuckled, scratching at his whisker marks in embarrassment. Ino had to resist the sudden urge to rub the back of her hand against his cheek. She had always secretly wondered what those marks would feel like, even all the way back in their academy days. Maybe she'd finally get the chance to satisfy that curiosity. I've got a couple of interested publishers who are taking a look at it. They're loosely based off my own experience working in the field. Ino raised an eyebrow. If even half the stuff she had heard about some of the missions Naruto had been on were true, it'd make for one hell of a reading. The boy was a trouble magnet when it came to misclassified missions or just plain old bad luck. Who the hell managed to run into a legendary missing ninja on their first C ranker? Nothing classified, I hope, she asked. I'm not an idiot, Naruto retorted with a roll of his eyes. Well, go on, she encouraged him with a nudge of her big toe. He poked back at the bottom of her foot, causing her to giggle slightly at the ticklish sensation. Seeing the devilish expression on his face, Ino quickly retracted her feet with a shriek before he could trap them, causing him to laugh. I won't do anything, I promise. Seeing the assuaging gestures he was making, Ino blew a raspberry at him anyways. Oh come on, where's the trust? He moaned dramatically with sad puppy eyes. Conceding, Ino gingerly edged her feet back into his lap, ready to withdraw them in a heartbeat if he showed a hint of taking advantage of her exposed position. Her concerns were waylaid as he turned his body sideways and began to lazily massage her feet. Her body relaxed as his hands seemed to pinpoint every ache and tension in her foot. So what else? She asked while closing her eyes at the pleasant sensation. It was going to be hard not to fall asleep between the tender attention he was paying to her feet and the rhythmic rocking of the carriage. Well, I also like to draw, he said after a moment's thought. I remember, she exclaimed with a laugh. You used to zone out in Iruka's class and doodle comics in your notebook. You saw that? Naruto asked with surprise. You weren't exactly trying to hide it, she snorted. Figured you were too busy fawning over your Sasuke-chan, he retorted, causing her to blush faintly. Her childhood infatuation with the Uchiha was rather embarrassing now that she was older. Sure, he had been the dark, brooding, handsome genius of their year, the sort of guy clueless little girls who hadn't had real experiences in relations would go for. But now that she was older, Ino really wanted to be able to go back in time and slap her younger self. Beyond just the superficial attraction, there was also the many signs and symptoms pointing at the fact that Sasuke would make for horrible boyfriend material. He didn't pay attention to anyone beyond himself and his problems, arrogance practically oozed off him, he was antisocial and he just wasn't all that nice in general. Plus there was also the whole running away and betraying the village thing. Major point deduction. You weren't any better with Sakura. She shot back. If anything, you were worst. I never stalked her back home, he countered with a smirk. And don't deny it, I saw you do it. Flushing at the accusation that she really couldn't defend herself against, Ino blew out a breath at a strand of hair that had escaped her mother's formation during their tickle war. I was like 12. Besides, what were you doing following me anyways? Now it was Naruto's turn to look slightly embarrassed. I was actually planning to ambush Sasuke and kick his ass so I could impress Sakura, he admitted abashedly. Ino shook her head and couldn't help but laugh. Guess we both grew up, huh? Naruto smiled sadly as he gazed out at the passing scenery. Yeah, I guess we did. Seeing the nostalgic funk her date had fallen into, Ino felt her own spirits dim somewhat. Things sure had changed a lot since their academy days. Life was simpler in their childhood. It was odd how all those little things that had seemed so important back then were completely inconsequential now. Ino had not seen those girls she had hung out with back in the academy for years now, only occasionally exchanging polite greetings when they passed each other by in the village. Her teammates that had felt like such a burden at the beginning were now closer than family, she wouldn't trade them for anyone else in the world. The vaunted genius of their year who was supposed to do great things had turned into a traitor on equal standing with his brother who was considered one of the most dangerous criminals the Leaf Village had ever produced. The dead last of their year who had had his dreams of being Hokage laughed at and spat upon was now the closest one to inheriting that prestigious mantle even though he had seemingly lost interest in his childhood ambition. Paddling her legs in his lap to shake him out of his peculiar mood, Ino jabbed her foot at his hands demandingly. Naruto looked startled for a moment, as if he had been woken from a trance. Smiling sheepishly at his date, he resumed his massage of her feet, the searing heat from his palms slowly working their way up to her calves. The migration of his hands to the upper parts of her legs was rather distracting to Ino as the intimate motion brought back memories of other locations he had caressed further up her thighs that one night. I guess there's not much else about me you might not know in terms of my likes. I'm a pretty simple guy, Naruto continued. My dislikes. Well, I have to say I've come to hate anything remotely snake-related. I also happen to dislike S-rank missions. Ino sat up straighter at his admission. What? No way. You're like always clamoring for S ranks though. Naruto shrugged. I ask for them because I know I can do them. Anyone else they send might fail, which is no good for the village. But beyond that, S ranks tend to suck ass with a straw. You're either sent deep into enemy territory where the expectation for survival is relatively low, or you're sent to take down a target that's pretty much a guaranteed one-way ticket even if you succeed. Intel for S rankers tends to be a joke if you're lucky, and if you're not, well, plus the pay blows camel nuts. It's an S rank though, exclaimed Ino in disbelief. How can the pay suck? Money goes up with mission ranking. Naruto chuckled darkly. You've never been on an S ranker, have you? That's a common misconception for people who haven't. As you know, we get the majority of our income from going on missions. A cut of the revenue the village receives is divided up between the team that took on the assignment. But that only applies to missions that are being funded and paid for. The majority of AD rankers are problems people are willing to throw money at to make it go away. S rankers generally aren't bankrolled by anyone. They're classified under village security or some other nonsense, Hokage issued and all that. Only thing that applies is hazard pay, and they don't tend to give you too much when your occupation involves throwing yourself headfirst into every dangerous situation that comes along. So what? You're telling me you're getting chump change and genin salary when you're running an S opposite? Ino asked incredulously. That's about right, Naruto said, dark humor evident in his voice. It's why normally only Junin and Anbu take on S rank. It's not just a skill issue. They can afford to get by on their salary even if they don't get a boost to their income from a share of mission profits. Why are you still a genin? Demanded Ino in outrage. You definitely have the skills for Chunin, Junin even. You've been back almost a year now, why haven't you gone for the exam? Hell, why hasn't Tsunade-sama just promoted you? Ah well, Tsunade Bakken asked me to hold back on my promotion so I can join the next Chunin exam that's supposed to be held in Cloud Village next month. I actually registered for it already. Something about needing me to help Konoha flex its muscle a little on the international scene. Ino relented in her anger on her friend's behalf now that she paused to think about it. In a way it made sense. Naruto was probably the most powerful genin in the world at the moment. He'd smash his way through the competition with ease, building up Konoha's reputation for producing powerful and competent shinobi. The fact that he would be upstaging Cloud on their own turf would be an added bonus politically, as the two villages was still in a somewhat Cold War state after the whole Hyuga kidnapping fiasco. I guess Konoha's reputation could use the help, admitted Ino. We didn't have any stellar showings in the past few years. In fact, the Chunin exam right before Naruto came home had been particularly disastrous for the Leaf Village. Saying their candidates got creamed would have been a monumental understatement. At least people could normally blame it on bias and favoritism when none of their shinobi made it to the finals to be showcased on the world stage. That doesn't really work as an excuse when the exam had taken place in your hometown. How embarrassing was it that none of your own people made it to the finals with a home field advantage? It was a good thing none of the fatality statistics for the Leaf Chunin hopefuls during the preliminaries were available to the public. That would have been like getting your ass beaten unconscious then having your face urinated upon by the victor. It wasn't an accident that Tsunade had asked Naruto to hold back for the Cloud Village Chunin exam. It had been a Cloud shinobi who had taken home the victory at Konoha's embarrassing debacle. Naruto destroying the competition in Cloud would go a long way towards evening the score. A bit different from our debut, huh? Asked Naruto with a grin. We had like half the rookies make it to the finals. I still can't believe you got a double KO with Sakura. I was pretty sure it was over when you nailed her with your mind swap technique. He mimed the body-mind switch seal, getting surprisingly close to what it was supposed to look like. What happened? Did you miss or something? I'm not sure, confessed Ino. It felt different. Normally when I slip into someone's body there's a brief moment of disorientation, then I'm in the pilot's seat. With Sakura the blackout time was much longer, and suddenly I found myself back in my own body. Weird. What is she like, immune or something? I don't know. I mean, it's possible, I suppose. When we actually try to delve into someone's mind instead of taking control of their body, it always works differently for each person, so I guess it's not inconceivable that she has some sort of natural defense against it. It could also be that I hadn't fully mastered the technique back then. I mean, I haven't tried it since, replied Ino thoughtfully. Maybe forehead and I should have a little spar. She paused briefly, wondering why there was so much venom in that thought. Placing that little tidbit in the back of her mind to be examined later, Ino turned her attention back to Naruto. Their conversation was cut short as the carriage finally ground to a halt. Startled by the abrupt stop, Ino looked out the window to see the bright lights of the big city of Kyoto glaring back at her. There was a polite knock at the door, causing her to scramble back to her side of the carriage and hastily put on her shoes, gaining her an amused look from her fellow blonde. Uzumaki-san, Yamanaka-san, we have arrived at our destination, came the muffled announcement of their driver through the doorway. Where is our destination? Questioned Ino as she stood up to follow Naruto, who was already at the door. Instead of answering, her date stepped out of the carriage before holding his hand out to her chivalrously with a pleased smile adorning his features. Why don't you come on down and find out? Taking his offered hand, Ino carefully stepped out of the carriage and gasped sharply at the sight before her. The building they were parked in front of was a standalone structure that stood out like a guiding light in a city full of buildings crammed next to one another. The only word that came to mind when she laid eyes on their destination was magnificent. It was pure snow white, a regal purity unlike anything Ino had ever laid eyes upon. The marble-like stone that made up the building glistened majestically against the backdrop of lights that illuminated the darkening night sky. Delicate pink hues of dying daylight from the setting sun outlined the three-story restaurant beautifully, highlighting the grandiose structure with an almost reverent aura. The artistic sign proclaiming it the ladies' last evening didn't need any fancy decorations to mar its elegance, the name itself held a weighty presence to those who knew of its reputation. The framework of the miniature palace was odd, more of a smooth-flowing architecture than the traditional defined straight edges of most building contours. Walls ebbed and flowed together, creating the illusion that this wasn't so much a structure built by man, but rather a formation that nature had shaped from its very essence during primordial creation. The entire backside of the construction, which happened to be made of an opulent one-way glass, peered out into the smooth gleaming surface of the Kappa Lake that was the backbone of Kyoto's tourist attraction. It would not be over-exaggerating to say that the building was a work of art in itself, perfection, or as close as mortals could achieve. The paved stone pathway that led up to the famous restaurant was lined with a minimal amount of vegetation, each granite tile carved with realistic imagery from the distant history of the elemental nations. Figures depicting the struggles of men and women who had long been laid to eternal rest told silent stories to those who walked by, unmoving reminders of the many different backgrounds that made the ladies' last evening possible. Dual fountains lined up on both sides of the path sent water dancing up in the air merrily, entertaining couples as they strolled down the lane towards their luxurious dining destination. Extending an arm to the still flabbergasted Ino, Naruto grinned from ear to ear as she automatically hooked her arms around the offered limb, enjoying the softness of her body coiled against his. Nothing made a man feel more on top of the world than when he had a beautiful girl in arm. The envious looks he was receiving from the other men who couldn't quite tear their eyes away from Ino certainly didn't dissuade that feeling. The ladies' last evening, gasped Ino in astonishment. How? It costs almost half a year of my pay just to get in the waiting line for a table. Steering Ino down the rather over-the-top trail leading to the entrance, Naruto shrugged his broad shoulders nonchalantly. Well, I know a guy who knows a guy. Ino socked his arm, causing him to laugh. No, really, how did you get us a table here? Who says I have a table? I just thought it'd be a nice place to walk around. Bursting into belly-shaking laughter at Ino's devastated expression, Naruto had to double over in order to keep his balance as his body shook uncontrollably. Tears of mirth rolled down his cheeks as he pointed a shaking finger at the blonde girl. Oh my god, Ino, your face, he wheezed between heaving breaths. Priceless. Naruto, she growled with her arms crossed impatiently over her rather well-developed chest, heedless of the curious stares they were receiving from the rich couples who were walking past. You better not be yanking my chain here. Regaining his composure, the blonde male rested his hands on her shoulders. The warmth from his palms was a pleasant contrast to the nip of nightfall. Hey, trust me a little here, he implored with a gentle smile. I want to show you a good night, and get to know you a little better. Would I lie to you? Melting slightly at his tender tone, and cursing herself for being weak, Ino conceded and linked her arm with his again as they continued on down the path. But really, how did you get us a table here, Mr. Genin Salary? The matard and I go way back, replied Naruto effortlessly. I sent him a message earlier today and he had a table cleared for us. Well, look at you, Mr. Connections, teased Ino with a wide grin. The heck type of history do you two share that gets him to backlog a bunch of nobles for you? Naruto ruffled his hair with his free hand, smirking arrogantly. Please, people bend over backwards to accommodate the future Hokage. Laughing at his antics, she allowed the deflection of her question to slide for now in favor of the excitement threatening to bubble over as they came closer to the entryway of the five-star restaurant. The ladies' last evening was rated as one of the top luxurious dining establishments in the entire Elemental Nations, often peaking at number 1 depending on the year. It wasn't just the lovely exterior and interior design. LLE boasted a world-class service team and a culinary staff that drew upon the best talents from across the lands. You could order food from all corners of the globe and there would be an expert chef on hand to deliver excellence to your demands. LLE was hailed by food critics as a culinary heaven that produced nothing short of masterpieces from their kitchens. Ino couldn't wait until she got to go back to brag to the girls about her evening out with Naruto. They were going to be so jealous. As they passed under the archway, soft music could be heard drifting out from within the entryway. Entering, Ino couldn't help but be riveted by the stylishly planned out design. The lighting was dim, low enough to alter the mood, but not so much that it was difficult to see. Artwork lay scattered tastefully around the villa-like interior, ranging from watercolor paintings of far-distant lands to pencil sketches of bizarre conceptions wrangled from deep within the artist's darkest dreams. Sculptures, statues and various other artifacts were tactfully sprinkled into the environment, spaced out evenly so that nothing clumped together to create an unbalance to the roving eye. The entire ground floor was a panel of unblemished see-through glass that was laid over a massive aquarium that boasted its own flourishing coral ecosystem that could be seen through the crystal-clear water. Schools of curious nibbling fish and swarms of lethargic cnidarians swam side by side underneath the feet of the diners. Crabs, lobsters and other spiny crustaceans crawled under the crushing blue depths of the gargantuan fish tank, busily poking away at what they found in the colorful reef far below. Each of the lower-level tables was separated into their own private fenced-off areas to ensure maximum privacy for those who had paid a fortune to dine in peace. The low murmur of conversation mixed in amicably with the music being played, adding to the pleasant atmosphere of the restaurant. An elegant dance floor was kept bare at the center of the massive room, a handful of couples floating delicately across the ornate ground to a jaunty tune coming from an orchestra pit filled with seated men and women laboring over their instruments. A massive glass chandelier that was impossible to miss hung overhead, glittering light reflecting from its gems like 1,000 stars. A violinist strolled leisurely between tables, skillfully working his instrument to produce a sweet sound that tickled the ear. A lonely flute could be heard in the background, a wordless poetry tugging mournfully at the heart. In the far corner facing a table with 8 men, a woman wearing a beautiful dressing gown sat in front of a gracefully carved koto, plucking away at the strings while the men chatted and picked delicately at their meals. Scores of work staff wearing formal kimonos of varying styles and fashion that shared the only commonality of screaming class, wandered between tables serving the patrons. A tall dark-skinned man was carefully pouring champagne into a curvy flute with an elongated neck, making conversation with the seated women enamored at his every motion. A woman in a dark blue kimono was carrying a tray with a flaming dish dispassionately towards her table, completely unbothered by the burning heat inches away from her hair, which had been done up to such an extent that it made Ino's look like a 3-year-old's poor attempts at imitation. When they were done, the servers seemed to vanish, fading away to the background to allow their patrons to enjoy their meals in privacy. The eagerness swelling inside almost had Ino jumping up and down with glee. Resisting the urge to pinch herself, Ino instead cuddled Naruto's arm, earning her a slight leering smile from him. She eased off on squishing the side of her against his elbow, not wanting to encourage him too much. She couldn't believe it, she was really here. Ino had always dreamed of being treated like a princess, but being a kunoichi tended to make one a realist. Wanting something doesn't always mean you'll get it. But here she was, about to dine at a place normally reserved for nobility or the super wealthy. Shooting Naruto a speculating look, she couldn't help but wonder just how much she knew about her companion. This whole mysterious friend of a friend business was beginning to bother her. Ino hated mysteries. As the couple in front of them was led away to their table by a smiling server, Ino finally caught sight of the man in charge of running the front for the ladies last evening. He was dressed in a chic gray suit that rested easily on his tall wiry frame, immediately setting him apart from the other staff. A thick golden goatee protruded from a strong chin, winding upwards in a delicate curl that beset his severe expression. His single visible eye glared out harshly from behind a long strand of hair that was brushed carefully over his face, daring patrons to make a complaint. A lit cigarette hung limply from scowling lips, smoke lazily drifting upwards in an endless stream of gray. He looked rather young for such an honored station, but he had greeted each of the couple before them by name, a testament to his position and the power that came with it. Everyone seemed to treat him with a healthy amount of respect. After all, this was the man who, despite their money or status, had the ability to deny them entry as he saw fit. The ladies last evening didn't believe in refunds, and her strict storefront guardian didn't believe in second chances. Catching sight of Naruto, the stern face cracked like dried earth, forming the impression of a smile. The normally pleasant facial expression added to his rather intimidating look rather than detracting from it. Well, he drawled, finally taking the smoldering cancer stick out of his mouth. A perfect ring of smoke was blown in the blonde Jinchuriki's direction. Look at what the wind blew in. I might have to call the busboy to come take out the trash. Naruto smiled back idly. Hell, Sanji, I'm a bit disappointed. Didn't think such a classy dive would leave garbage lying around. And at the entrance of all places, what were they thinking? The two men shared a hearty laugh before clasping their hands in greeting, the simple handshake quickly morphing into a one-armed hug that involved a lot of enthusiastic backslapping. When they finally broke apart, they sported matching grins on their faces. Honestly, Uzumaki, I thought you said you'd never be caught dead in an establishment like this, remarked the now named celebrated restaurant host, leaning up against his podium. Not alone, I wouldn't, the blonde male retorted with a scowl, digging his pinky finger in his ear. A guy coming in by himself. How awkward would that be? Sanji finally turned his attention to Ino, who had been standing hesitantly behind her date. And you must be the lovely lady who convinced this idiot to grace my restaurant with his unsightly presence. Can't say you did me any favors, but I suppose your fine company makes up for this ruffian's uncouth appearance. As far as pity dates go, though, I'm pretty sure you could have done better than him. Takaya Sanji, at your service, madam. Ino took his offered hand in a firm shake, curiosity eating away at her. Yamanaka, Ino. He couldn't have been much older than Naruto, maybe 3 or 4 years. She had never met any of his friends outside of the Rookie 9 and Team Guy, hell, she didn't even know he had friends outside their group. Pity date, objected Naruto indignantly. Don't mistake me for yourself, Takaya. What was that? Demanded the host as he got up in the blonde male's mug. Don't think just because you're a ninja now that I won't kick your ass. My leg's been itching lately, it must have known you were coming. Ino couldn't help but laugh as the two men scowled menacingly at one another, shooting daggers with their eyes and rolling up the sleeves as if they were preparing to throw down. Knowing Naruto, he wouldn't hesitate to do just that despite their location. Really, boys, she said with hands placed disapprovingly on curvy S, you're making a scene. And indeed they were. The line that had formed at the front was starting to fill with annoyed-looking aristocrats who had no doubt never had to wait for anything in their lives. A quick glare from Sanji and the grumblings wilted away to nothing. "Ah well, I wouldn't want to expose Yamanaka-san to scene of violence on her night out," sighed Sanji dramatically. "Follow me, I've got your table all set up." Stifling a giggle as she watched Naruto flip his friend's back off while mockingly twirling an invisible goatee, the pair followed their guide who led them up the grand staircase situated before the dance floor. Ino ran her hand against the smooth hand railing, glancing downwards to catch a glimpse of an enormous angel fish drifting slothfully underneath them. Its single massive plate-sized eye blinked up at her as if winking, causing her to stifle a smile. The second floor mirrored the ground level in design, but was far more spacious and accommodating in terms of the seating arrangements. There was also a stage where a number of elegantly dressed women were performing a traditional flower dance, moving in time and rhythm to the steady beat of an unseen drum. The floors must have been built relatively soundproof as the music below could not be heard over the dull pounding of the hand instrument. "Not that I expect someone like you to appreciate this, Naruto," grumbled the older male as he led them all the way up to the third floor. "But I got you guys the best seat in the house." Ino gasped as they pulled to a stop at their table. Well, more like their section of the upper level of the floor. There was an entire room prepared with a low-seated dark wood tabletop that was polished to a reflective sheen. The futon cushions were expensive in appearance, practically a silent announcement of a lavish lifestyle, as was the smart bamboo shoebox that was at the entryway. There was no tableware to be seen, presumably they would be getting them when they were served. The window next to the table opened up into the vast expanse of the beautiful nighttime lakeside view. There was even a balcony they could walk out into with a smaller, more intimate table set out with two comfortable-looking chairs placed opposite of one another. The steps leading down to their private balcony put it low enough so that it would not obstruct their view from the table within the room. The menu and drink selection can be found in the holder in the side walls, the one-eyed host explained, pushing on a wooden panel to open up into a shelf holder revealing what appeared to be a leather-bound book. "Ring the bell when you need an attendant." Giving a short bow, the man gave the couple a small smile before retreating to the doorway. "Enjoy your meal. A server will be by to bring you refreshments." "Oh, and Naruto," Sanji said as he paused at the entrance. "Try not to this up, huh? You wouldn't believe who I had to tell to screw off in order to get you this setup." Naruto flipped him the bird, earning himself a smirk and another smoke ring. The bamboo doorway slid shut with barely a sound, leaving the blonde pair to seat themselves. "So what do you think so far, Ino-chan?" asked Naruto as he took off his shoes, carefully seating himself across from her without upsetting any of the lavish decorative cloths. "It's amazing," she gushed gleefully. "Look at the view. The scene outside their window would have made a wonderful inspiration for a painting." A majestic mountainscape stretched up off on the far distant shore, dyed a faint salmon by the final remnants of sunlight as evening came into full swing. The glowing moon hung in the darkening heavens like a serene orb, surrounded by the thousands upon thousands of tiny candle light of stars that were slowly becoming visible. Boats could be seen lazily drifting about in the water, and at the center of Kappa Lake a massive lit cruise was anchored, an island of civilization in the hub of inky darkness. A soft rap on the doorway was heard before it was pulled back, revealing a young female server in a pink floral patterned kimono. She held herself in a demure kneeling position, showing all the grace and etiquette of a noble raised woman. "Please excuse the interruption, honored guests," she intoned shyly. "This one's name is Sayuri, and will be your humble attendant this night." She punctuated her greeting with a deep formal bow. "If there is anything this one could provide for you this night, please do not hesitate to ring the bell." Sayuri gestured at the long length of golden rope hanging from the ceiling within reaching distance from the table. The two blondes traded perplexed looks as the girl continued to wait patiently in her half-prostrated position at their doorway, unsure of what to do. Neither was used to being treated with quite that much respect. Ah, Sayuri, said Naruto unsurely after a moment of silence, if you could bring us some tea while we take a look at the menu. Of course, honored guest. What blend would you like this one to bring? Seeing the flummoxed expression on her date, Ino stifled a snigger before coming to his rescue. Do you have gyokuro? She inquired politely. Of course. And would sir have the same? Sayuri prompted. Sure. Yeah, gyokuro sounds good. Ino finally couldn't hold it in anymore and snorted out a laugh after their attendant left with a soft snap of the bamboo divider that shielded them from the rest of the diners. Do you even know what gyokuro is? She asked in amusement. I drink green tea, Ino, deadpanned Naruto flatly. I don't think this place has ever heard of something so layman. Commoner brew, Ino agreed snobbishly with a straight face, before quickly hiding herself behind the menu so that she wouldn't burst into another fit of giggles. God, what was wrong with her? She was acting like an airhead tonight. They'd probably throw us out on general principle if we asked for water. She added, enjoying the merriment on her date's face. Honestly, Ino felt a bit out of place at such a prestigious establishment. She had been raised in a rather modest lifestyle despite being from a prominent clan in Konoha. Having Naruto here made it a lot less nerve-wracking. Everything just seemed to roll right off that boy's shoulders and she couldn't help but be infected by his cheerful attitude. Ino's eyes widened comically as she began to page through the thick text that comprised what was the menu for the ladies last evening. They weren't kidding when they said LLE had a wide selection in their repertoire. She'd read through books published by the Intel department that were thinner than this. Holy crap, exclaimed Naruto, who was similarly flipping through the dense list of options. They got 40 pages dedicated to sushi alone. A quick scan through showed that not every single dish was unique, it was just that there were different sections of the menu. One divided for the types of food, another for the region from which they hailed, and still another by what season the food was normally served at, and on it went. A glance at the sushi section had her mouth watering, as there were a few selections she had heard about, but never had the opportunity to try, mainly because it would burn a hole in her bank account. Noticing that there was no price tag next to any of the items, Ino felt a gnawing guilt build up against the temptation to order without restraint. Naruto wasn't exactly loaded by his own account. Naruto, how are you planning to pay for all of this? She asked hesitantly, hoping she wouldn't offend him. We're shinobi, I figured we can just eat and run. They wouldn't be able to catch us. Ino's jaws dropped, but she quickly snapped it shut as she spotted the look of suppressed mirth in his playful blue eyes. Huffing indignantly, she crossed her hands across her ample bosom, noting with pleasure how that simple movement caused Naruto brief distraction. I'm being serious here. I don't want to bankrupt you. Don't worry about it, he waved off. Order as much as you like. I've got it covered. Tentatively picking up the menu again, Ino shot him a curious glance. Another one of your friend of a friend's? Naruto just wiggled his fingers at her with a mysterious smile. A soft knock announced the return of Sayuri, who brought with her 2 elaborate ceramic cups, one decorated by a gorgeous phoenix for Ino and the other with a flawless dragon coiled fiercely around the mug for Naruto. A bottle of sake along with 2 smaller porcelain cups was also placed down at the table next to the pot of tea. Spring Daisoke sake, their attendant explained, seeing their confusion. Complements Gyokuro's strong flavor very well. Sayuri quickly retreated to the doorway again, reminding them to ring for her when they were ready to order before withdrawing with another deep bow. Is it just me, began Naruto slowly, or is it just plain weird to have someone wait on you hand and foot? You're just not cut out to be a noble, Ino sneered with pretend haughtiness. Sure, princess, jested the host of the Demon Fox, and I'm sure your horde of invisible servants at home give you a foot rub before bed every night too. The two exchanged some friendly banter while perusing through the menu, trying to make up their minds on what they wanted to order. Oh sweet. They have ramen, exclaimed Naruto in excitement, causing Ino to roll her eyes at his antics. While there were some startling changes to the boy over his 3-year absence, there was still a lot that had remained the same. Really? You come to a world-renowned restaurant just to order ramen? She demanded incredulously. Well, it'd be world-renowned ramen then, wouldn't it? He countered glibly. Ino rolled her eyes, wondering how he could waste such a good opportunity to try out some of the finest food in the elemental nations. She for one was not going to let this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity go to waste. Well, I'm going to try out their seasonal sushi medley, she decided. Holy crud, the smallest is like a 20-piece combo. This fish head curry ramen sounds interesting. You want appetizers? The thought of more food on top of the already massive serving of sushi made Ino frown. Her beautiful figure wasn't maintained because she binged on food at every chance she got. But this was probably going to be one of the few times she would ever get to dine in such a high-class establishment. Only if you help me with the sushi, she bargained. Seeing his affirmative nod, Ino flicked through the appetizer selection and felt slightly overwhelmed by the selection available. There were too many for the brain to comprehend. A menu wasn't supposed to be this complicated. All right, forget this, grumbled Naruto, closing his booklet with a resolute snap. I'm just gonna open a random page and we'll order the first thing I point at. Really? She asked with a laugh. What if you get something weird? I swear I saw something about an octopus stuffed with elephant testicles or something. Where's your sense of adventure? Naruto challenged with roguish smile. Who knows, maybe elephant testicles taste great. Ino scoffed at his proclamation and shook her head. Yeah, you do that, testicle boy. Chicken, taunted Naruto. Sensible, corrected Ino, dismissing his goading with a superior tilt of her nose. The two continued their verbal jousting while browsing through the considerable selection of starters, occasionally interjecting with disgusted exclamations and comments on the entries they came across. Finally agreeing on the sushi plate that Ino wanted along with a white curry udon because Ino refused to allow him to order ramen, and about a king's ransom's worth of appetizers, the couple signaled for Sayuri's return. Their order was taken by memory, because their server certainly didn't write anything down as far as they could tell. But she managed to recite their order perfectly at the end of their dictation, so they weren't exactly worried they'd be getting their order mixed up. So Naruto, how do you know Sanji? And what dirt do you have on a guy like him that gets you the best table in the house on a same-day notice? Asked Ino nosily as she accepted the cup of warm sake her date poured her from the bottle sitting on a small box of heated coals. Taking a ginger sip, she felt her eyes widen as the sweet belly-warming rice fermented liquor trickled down her throat and warmed her entire body. This made the stuff they ordered at a Mikey's taste like bathroom moonshine. What Takaya? Naruto sniffed derisively. Don't let that fancy suit and upper-class talk fool ya. He was an alley jackal just like me back in the day. Gotta say though, never would have thought in a million years that Red Leg Sanji would end up working at a place like this. Alley jackal. Ino tested the words in her mouth, her curiosity piqued by the unfamiliar term. Yeah, you know, Naruto said, making a wild gesture as if that would suddenly make her understand him. Ino squinted at the blonde in front of her as he poured himself a healthy portion of sake. No, I don't know. Street trash. Gutter rat. He tried with a puzzled expression. Konoha's Jinchuriki scratched at his head. It was obvious he was trying to convey something he felt that everyone was aware of, which made trying to explain it that much harder. You're talking about orphans, right? Ino said after a moment's thought. The demon host snorted, a hint of bitterness entering his voice. No, orphans got to live in orphanages. Gutter rats lived on the streets kicking the living shit out of one another to see who got first pickings out of garbage cans. Wait, you lived on the streets? Ino gasped in horror. But I thought you were raised at an orphanage before you got your own apartment. Who sponsored you for the academy then? I was at an orphanage until I was about 5, maybe 6. Don't really remember all that well. One day they chased me out and told me to never come back. I bummed about on the streets for a couple of years before Gramps found me and got me set up with my own apartment and a seat in the academy. How did you survive? Demanded the shocked mind walker. It was inconceivable to her that their village would be cruel enough to force a child to survive on their own, demon host or not. Hell, shouldn't someone have told the Hokage that the village's Jinchuriki was living on the streets? Seemed like kind of an important detail to miss. Naruto shrugged with a distant look in his eyes as painful memories surfaced. I wouldn't have made it if I had tried to go it alone. Don't let the cleanliness fool you. Konoha's streets are as unforgiving as Kiri's, we just clean up the bodies better. Out there you learned real fast that survival meant depending on others. Ino traded her sake for some tea, barely noticing the agreeable sensation on her tongue caused by the aftertaste of the alcohol combining with the expensive brew. Seeing Naruto's slightly bothered countenance, she steered his thoughts away from whatever memory was haunting him. So Sanji lived on the streets too? She prodded him. Oh yeah, the blonde male laughed. He had a few years on me, but we quickly learned to team up and take advantage of the nastier folks who had it out for me. We used to run this scheme where I'd go and insult some villager who had a hard-on for seeing my blood and have that person chase me down an alleyway. Takaya would be waiting to ambush them around a corner out of public sight. Naruto's whimsical smile turned rather ferocious. In the dim room, Ino could have sworn she saw his whisker marks thicken for a moment. She dismissed it as a trick of a light after a closer examination. A kick to the knee to drop them, then one to the back of the head, chuckled Naruto nostalgically in reminiscence, making a pistol motion to his temple, and we'd be able to eat for the next few days with whatever we found in their wallet. That's terrible, laughed Ino, unable to help herself. As horrible as that was, it wasn't like those villagers hadn't deserved it. Why didn't they report you? Well, it was illegal to mention anything to do with my Jinchuriki status back in the day, so a lot of people probably didn't want to raise too many questions that might end up with their heads separated from their necks. Plus, no one ever managed to catch us in the act together. At best, they'd only see me running like hell before they got knocked out. You're a thug, Naruto, accused Ino sardonically, jabbing a well-maintained nail at him. I can't believe I'm going out with a thug. I thought girls liked a bad boy. He jibed, topping off their teacups. We like pretend bad boys, corrected the mind walker. The real deal is kinda scary. Did you like sell drugs too? Oh come on Ino-chan, what you take me for, whined Naruto. It's not like we do that anymore. I pretty much stopped that sort of thing when I entered the academy. Weren't you like Sanji's meal ticket? What did he do after? By then he was old enough to work odd jobs and prizefight for money in the underground fight rings, so he didn't need to fleece people as much either. I'd let him and a few others I ran with back in the day crash at my place when they needed it. A few others, huh? Remarked Ino with a scrutinizing gaze. So am I going to get to meet more of these, friend of a friend's? Maybe, he replied airily with a wave. So now that I've told you a piece of my checkered past, it's your turn, Ino-chan. What if I don't have anything dark and checkered? She shot back inquisitively. Oh please, everyone's got a bit of history they keep to themselves, snorted Naruto as he lifted his cup to take a sip of tea. Oh? Asked Ino coyly, spotting a perfect opening to get back at him. Like the fact that you deflowered Hinata then Tamari. The blonde seated across from her choked on his drink, hacking violently as the hot liquid backed down the wrong pipe. Ino tossed her head back and laughed uproariously as her date struggled to regain his breathing rhythm from her surprise attack. Damn, you girls really do tell each other everything, mumbled a red-faced Naruto under his breath. Whether the redness was the result of choking on the tea or embarrassment was hard to say. I feel all sorts of cheap, the Yamanaka heiress mock complained. You're like sloppy thirds in our group. Naruto chuckled good-naturedly, wiping the last of the liquid from his chin with a napkin. Well, they didn't have any complaints, did they? He asked brazenly. Ino flushed and turned from the mischievous look he was giving her. No, they certainly didn't. A few drinks in had both Tamari and Hinata drunkenly sharing their exploits with the blonde Jinchuriki. It still burned her ears to think about some of the mind-boggling things Naruto had done to them. The boy apparently spared nothing when it came to helping his lover achieve satisfaction. Didn't think so, smirked the blonde male. So back to you, Ino. Dark and terrible secret. Now. I don't have any. She insisted, shrinking in her seat. Oh, come on, protested Naruto. You've got way too much dirt on me as it is. It's only fair. Oh, fine, fine, she relented. Pausing to give it some thought, a particular memory shot to the forefront of her mind, much to her internal humiliation. Shooting the blonde male who was watching her with eagerness, she gave him a hard glare. You better not tell anyone what I'm about to tell you, Naruto. He made a crossing motion over his chest with his finger, then mimed zipping his mouth shut. I mean it, Naruto. If this gets out, I'm gonna kick your ass. She threatened, waving a fist in his face. It's like you don't trust me, he snarked back smartly. Fine, Ino said while crossing her arms. Probably the only reason I'm telling you this is cause of all the alcohol I've consumed tonight. Still hesitating, she glanced back uncertainly at Naruto. Seeing the puppy dog eyes he was sending her way, she caved and finally surrendered to his go-on motions. Sakura and I used to practice kissing together back in our academy days. Naruto's eyes widened and he burst out into a fit of laughter after a moment of disbelief. It's not that funny, protested Ino weakly, her cheeks warm with mortification. Was this before or after you two became rivals? Asked Naruto after he regained his composure. After, Ino admitted embarrassedly. Practicing for the emo duck butt king the first, take it. Snickered the blonde male. Now it was her turn to laugh. The moniker brought an oddly accurate image of the 12-year-old Sasuke to her head. What did you call him? What, the emo duck butt king? I thought everyone knew that one. Oh wait, you were a fangirl. Probably no one told you cause they didn't want to receive a beat down. Ino gave him the double one-finger salute from across the table, half tempted to lob something at him. But she didn't want to get thrown out of the establishment for rowdy behavior, not before they got their food anyways. Well, I certainly like a freaky girl, hummed Naruto, flashing her a dazzling smile. Ino's stomach did a little flip-flop, causing her heart to skip a beat. So what were you and Daddy talking about? She quickly asked, hoping to change the subject. Just regaling him with tales on how I pulled one over the intel department back in the day. Apparently they never figured out how I managed to sneak in and out of their interrogation facility without anyone noticing. Course, that didn't stop them from pinning it on me. What happened? Ino questioned with interest. The younger Naruto had been dismissed as a troublemaker at best, but if she really thought about it, he had managed to pull off some amazing stuff for someone who wasn't even a genin yet. How many 12-year-olds managed to outrun Anbu? Or put one over the Hokage? Before he could answer, a soft rap at the doorway interrupted their conversation. Sayuri had returned with their selection of appetizers, along with 2 small bowls of miso soup. The tray she hefted with one hand was astonishingly full, showing that the girl had some impressive arm strength to be able to so effortlessly carry it around. As their attendant set the plates of food before them, both blondes could feel their stomachs rumble a little when the tantalizing scents of the fresh-made dishes wafted up to tickle their noses. Ino immediately seized her pair of chopsticks as soon as Sayuri had retreated from the room, choosing to snatch up one of the perfectly fried golden gyozas from the platter. Her taste buds sent their approval to her brain, lighting up her reward centers in a chemical frenzy. The mind walker felt the urge to shudder at the pure ecstasy assaulting her mouth at the moment. Try the jellyfish, suggested Naruto enthusiastically, who had already polished off a quarter of the pickled seafood dish. The cool, crunchy noodle-like tentacles had a mildly sour kick to them, but the copious amounts of sesame seeds scattered throughout helped counteract the acidity to create a savory fusion of flavor that was pleasantly refreshing. "So what happened?" repeated Ino as she took an experimental sip of her cooling miso soup. It had the perfect balance of tofu and seaweed, just the way she liked it. "Delicious." "Well," Naruto said after he swallowed his mouthful of the lightly battered tempura shrimp he had been chewing on, "IT is pretty stringent with their security checks of just about everyone and everything that goes into the facility." Ino nodded sagely. The amount of time it took her to go from the entrance to the underground facility was ridiculous. There was even some talk about adding a cavity search into the day-to-day security protocols. Luckily, that had been quickly axed due to the uproar amongst staff when the idea had first been proposed. Ibiki was still grumbling about it, wondering if they were all just that squeamish or if there were that many people sneaking contraband in using their rectal cavities. "But there is one person they never check," Naruto said with a wicked smile. "Wait, really?" Ino felt a stab of anger at the injustice of it. She had to stand still and pretty much be groped all over for 15 minutes at 4 separate stations every day, but some clown got to just waltz on through security. "Who?" she demanded. "The Hokage." Ino paused in her fury to stare blankly at Naruto for a moment, her mind trying to process what she had just been told. "You impersonated the Hokage," she said slowly. I don't even have words for that. You do know what treason is, right? That thing where you do something that's a crime against your village and ends up with you either thrown in a cell in IT for the rest of your life or have your head removed by sharp pointy objects." Naruto chuckled and waved his chopsticks at her. "That only applies to ninjas. I was still a student back in the day, so I'd have gotten a slap on the wrist at worst. Course if I did it now." Ino rested her forehead on the table to cool her overactive mind. "I am on a date with a moron," she moaned pathetically. Naruto poked at her scalp with his chopsticks, prodding her to see if she'd get back up. "It's not like I prank people anymore. Besides, you have to admit it was pretty funny." "What did you do?" she asked, getting back to a more proper sitting position. It wouldn't do to have Sayuri walk in and see them acting like 3-year-olds. "I hid random toys throughout the office during my inspection," laughed Naruto. "Damn, I wish I had been there when Ibiki walked into his office and found the blow-up doll in his chair." Ino had to cover her mouth with both hands to stifle the laughter threatening to burst forth as she could imagine the exact expression on her boss's face. That might explain the strap-on dildo Anko keeps on top of her desk. "Oh god, I gave that to Anko?" asked a horrified Naruto. "She doesn't use that on the prisoners, does she?" "Wait, what am I saying? Of course she does. Poor bastards. Surprisingly, Anko just has to threaten them with it. Most men crack like an egg when they see the size of that thing strapped to her waist." "Nah, more often than not she tends to bring it home to experiment with Kakashi," said the blonde girl, forming air quotes with her fingers. "TMI, TMI," shouted Naruto frantically with fingers in his ears. "I did not need to know that." The couple steadily worked away at their appetizers, trading stories of their genin days as they polished away the food. Everyone had done the Tora the cat mission, and no one managed to catch that little beast without some harrowing story of having to dive into rapid rivers full of flesh-eating fish, marching through swamp lands filled with sinkholes, or in Naruto's case kill and cut open a giant snapping turtle that had swallowed the little furball when it had gotten into the training area 44, aka the Forest of Death. The temptation to leave the cat in the slow-moving reptile and call it in as a failure had been great, but Kakashi had quickly nixed that conspiracy amongst his genin. "Seriously?" demanded Ino in disbelief. "Honestly, I thought it was just a rumor. You really ran into one of the 7 swordsmen of the mist on your first C rank?" "Ran into him and killed him," confirmed the blonde male, jabbing his chopsticks at her to emphasize his point. Well, Kakashi-sensei did anyways. I ended up fighting Zabuza's apprentice with Sasuke. We were lucky he didn't like to kill people. We would have never made it back from our first C ranker if Haku had taken us seriously. Gotta say, Zabuza was one badass motherer. Course it was a bit sad how it all went down, the demon of the mist brought low by chakra exhaustion and a few greedy mercenaries. You have horrible luck with missions, observed the Mind Walker, snatching the last piece of gyoza from the plate while Naruto was still reaching for it. Gloating at his pouty expression, she made sure to chew with her mouth wide open so he could see the last morsel vanish down her throat. Hungry azure eyes roamed her neck region, tracing the motion of each swallow, occasionally making its way lower. He was by no means hiding the fact that he was checking her out, something that brought an odd feeling of satisfaction to the blonde girl. Real classy, jeered the Jinchuriki. Ino stuck her tongue out at her date in reply. She was doing that lot tonight, wasn't she? Sayuri appeared at the doorway to take away their now empty dishes, prompting a suspicious glance from both shinobi, though they didn't say anything in her presence. You think she's spying on us? Whispered Naruto conspiringly after she left. I mean, how else did she know when we were done eating? Lucky guess, asked Ino skeptically. Their suspicion was quickly waylaid as their server returned with their main course. The ladies last evening certainly delivered in terms of the presentation of their food. The white curry udon was exactly as advertised, not a speck of color besides white could be seen in the dish. Everything from the broth down to the vegetables had been dyed a milky hue, turning the normally hearty presence of the soup dish into a tranquil pond. It was like staring at a Zen garden except in food form. Ino's sushi dish had an even more mysterious appearance. At first she wasn't sure what Sayuri had set before her. It was a plate covered by a large glass dome filled with a cloudy white mist that obscured the contents from view. When the cover was removed, the vapor quickly dissipated, but not before chilling Ino's skin as it escaped into the atmosphere. The 20 pieces of handcrafted sushi were placed inside a ceremonially decorated bento box, complete with painstaking artwork depicted lovingly along the sides. There were exactly 20 compartments, each of the bite-sized morsels contained within a work of art in of itself. It was almost too pretty to eat in her opinion, but she certainly wasn't here to admire at the food. Taking up the steel chopsticks that had been placed in front of her, Ino glanced at the card placed on top of the dish, instructing her to start eating from the top right and moving left and down and starting the process again at the next row. Snatching up the first of the tantalizing delicacies, topped with what appeared to be a thinly sliced salmon piece decorated with cod roe, she carefully worked the entire sushi roll in her mouth. Her eyes widened in surprise at the firework of flavors that had exploded on her tongue, nearly choking as the fresh wasabi brushed on the bottom activated like a kick to the face from Rock Lee. The harsh dry stinging in her nose caused tears to well in her eyes, but the enhancement to her palate brought on with the pairing of the spicy mustard was undeniable. Eagerly moving on to the next piece, she was astonished by the way the taste of the perfectly grilled eel harmonized with the leftover essence from her last bite. Quickly chewing through the second sushi piece, she snatched up the third, confirming her suspicion that the flavors of each sequential piece of sushi built upon that lingering taste of the last one. Screw this, thought Ino happily as she munched on the next morsel in the lineup. Naruto isn't getting a single bite. The white curry udon seemed to have found a place in Naruto's heart, judging by the pleased expression as he carefully worked the noodles into his mouth, careful not to splash broth onto his suit jacket. It was almost a shame to see such a masterpiece get eaten. Damn, this is some good stuff, he exclaimed as he took a careful sip of his tea. Glad you didn't order that ramen now, teased Ino. More like regret, lamented Naruto with a mournful air. Probably would have been amazing. Ino chuckled and popped another sushi piece into her mouth. 20 pieces was a lot, but with the way the dish had turned out she'd have happily downed 2 orders even if she regretted it tomorrow. How come you never brought Sakura here? Asked Ino curiously. I mean a fancy place like LLE. A girl could fall for you pretty easily. Naruto grinned disarmingly back at her. Well, that's good to know. How's my progress with you? Averting her gaze, the Yamanaka tried valiantly to ignore the heat building up in her cheeks. Instead, she diverted his flirting with her original question. Don't try to distract me. Why haven't you brought forehead here before? The whiskered blonde leaned back in his seat, a contemplative look on his face. I don't know, it just never really occurred to me back when I was chasing Sakura. Besides, I doubt Sanji could have pulled off these seats for me until this past year when the owner pretty much named him the de facto manager of the entire place. By then I'd already decided to move on. Really? Ino raised her eyebrows. I mean, this seems like a surefire way to impress a woman. Naruto shrugged. I guess I just never put too much thought into it. I wanted to go out with Sakura because of what she represented to me. If someone like her could accept me, then that meant I had finally made it out of the street life. But I never really gave much thought about what that really meant. Dating's more than just asking someone out and spending time with them, it's getting to know them, both the good and the bad. Maybe I was just too much of a kid to understand that back then. So why me? Ino asked quietly. What makes me so special? Is it just cause you slept with me? I mean, you did with Hinata and Tamari too, but I didn't hear about you going out of your way to set something like this up for them. How do you know you're the only girl I've brought here? Naruto questioned with a playful smile. Maybe I bring every woman I want to take home here. Sanji pretty much said you've never been here, reminded Ino with a roll of her eyes. Idly walking his chopsticks across the table, the blonde of Team 7 shrugged after a moment's thought. Maybe you're the first girl I really wanted to impress, Naruto answered uncertainly. An awkward silence fell between the two shinobi as they both went back to eating, each lost in their own thoughts. What was Ino supposed to say to that? Naruto seemed to genuinely want to have a relations with her, but she just wasn't sure. Despite her good looks, or maybe because of them, Ino had a rather bad dating record. Most the men she had gone out with had in the end had only one thing in mind, and she had quickly denied them that when she found out their aims. It made her a bit wary and suspicious when it came to guys declaring their interest in her. Maybe all this fancy attempts at wooing her was all a ploy just to get her back in bed with him. Though maybe that wouldn't be such a bad thing. The mind walker ruthlessly crushed that last thought, not wanting to give her mind time to explore that avenue too deeply. Time to change the subject. So what's it like living on your own? Asked Ino after a moment of racking her brain. She had been tempted to move out of her parents' place for a while now, but the allures of coming home and having someone take care of you had kept her with her family so far. Besides, she actually managed to save what she earned instead of blowing it all on rent and food. Naruto gave her a blank look from across the table. I don't know. It's not like I've lived with anyone before. Well, I mean, is it hard to get by on your salary? I've been thinking about moving out, but it just doesn't seem worth it at this point in my life. The blonde shrugged. I managed to make ends meet. Though back earlier in my career it was a lot harder. Gramps paid for my rent up until I actually made genin, but once I got the headband I was getting by on what I could make off D ranks and the pitiful pocket change they hand us as our salary. Ino winced as she recalled just how much that was. She could blow it all in one shopping spree and probably not even get a quarter of what she wanted. Hey, if S rankers don't pay out, how the heck are you living so well? She asked as the thought occurred to her. Having been inside Naruto's apartment, it certainly wasn't what you would expect of someone getting by paycheck to paycheck. Bounties, he replied simply. That's the one high point on S-rank missions if you're careful and have the time. Bounties. Sure. You're sent deep into enemy territory, you're bound to run into someone famous and worth a lot of money to some other country looking to collect their head. That's my compensation for running an S-op. Ino grimaced as she imagined a bearded Naruto running around with a bloody sack full of heads thrown over his shoulder like some psychopathic Santa Claus and shuddered slightly at the image. I've paged through the bingo books, some of them are worth a lot. I think Asuma-sensei was somewhere in the millions, she said. How often do you manage to run into someone like that? Surprisingly not all that often, Naruto laughed. It's not a guaranteed thing, but when you do, the payout's nice. Save up some of that cash instead of spending it all, some careful investments and voila. No need to worry about money. Investments? She probed, quirking an eyebrow at him. Yeah, I have a stake in 3 companies, one's a sping business out of Wave Country. A friend of mine came to me with the idea a few years ago looking for capital to fund his venture and I handed him some cash before I pointed him towards Wave. I also got partial owners of a coffee bean plantation near Suna and a company that's trying to build Sky SS. Sky SS? Asked Ino in disbelief. That sounds like something out of fiction. Well, it's more like a giant balloon with AS hull tied to the bottom and propellers on the back, explained Naruto. They already have a prototype that works on a small scale. They just needed funding for building larger ones. I mean, can you imagine it? Flying SS. It'd pretty much negate all the terrain issues we have in traveling. You could bypass bandits and other dangers by floating on overhead. Plus they'd make for excellent observation posts in enemy territory. Most jutsus don't have that good of a range. Ino mulled over the idea in her head, not quite able to wrap her mind around a floating S, or the fact that Naruto of all people had financial investments. She'd heard the term thrown around once or twice at clan meetings, but beyond that she didn't know too much about it. Have you had any returns yet? She asked skeptically. Well, the sping business is doing well, and the coffee bean plantation's first batch of crop is set to be harvested soon. Most the money I've made off the sping company has been funneled into the other 2, so I haven't seen much return yet, but once the Sky S manufacturer sets up shop I figure I can pretty much retire, he replied smugly. Right. Like you'd know what to do with yourself if you stopped being a shinobi. Laughing at the gloomy storm clouds forming over her date, Ino continued eating her dish. You're so mean, Ino-chan, moaned Naruto. I call it like I see it, she replied around another mouthful of exquisitely hand-crafted sushi. Their good-natured banter continued on throughout dinner, and the 2 blondes took the time to learn more about each other. It really was surprising how little they had known about the other given how long they had been friends, but perhaps that was more due to their association as the rookie 9 than a real friends to begin with. The 2 friends finishing off their meal with gusto, unminding of table manners as they fought over the last scraps of food before Sayuri returned to remove the empty dishes. If their attendant felt anything was out of place seeing the blondes throwing wadded up napkins at one another from across the table, she masterfully hid her feelings on the matter. For dessert they had ordered a simple pecan chocolate sea waffle dish served with 3 scoops peanut butter ice cream drizzled with a fine white sauce that Ino couldn't get enough of. Inexplicably there were also strips of crispy thick-cut hickory smoked bacon ringing the edges of the plate. A strange combination to be sure, but it went unexpectedly well together. Ino had been pleasantly surprised when Naruto had asked Sayuri for the peanut butter ice cream in place of the vanilla, flattered that he had remembered the small detail she had shared with him about herself. The amount of care and attention he showed her was both exhilarating and distressing at the same time. She couldn't help but find herself intrigued by her blonde companion, the idea of them being together slowly gaining traction much to her shock. Ino was currently at the pleasantly buzzed stage of drinking, not so much so that she wouldn't be able to walk straight, but she was beginning to find everything funny. The young couple had migrated outside to their balcony table, enjoying the refreshing night air now that the sun had set and the stars were out. The cloudless night was picture perfect, the full moon seeming unusually close to the planet as it loomed overhead. A nearly empty bottle of wine of an unknown brand and year that Sayuri had brought them along with their dessert lay midway between the two shinobi, their mostly empty glasses held loosely in hand. No, seriously, laughed Ino as she took another sip from her wine. Why the heck are you so afraid of ghosts? I don't know, groaned Naruto as he leaned back in his seat, one arm thrown casually over the backrest. It just doesn't seem right, you know. If they do exist, God knows how many are following me around after the number of people I've killed. An imaginary line of angry dead shinobi following the Jinchuriki everywhere popped into Ino's head and she tittered at the image. It's not funny, Ino, he whined. I mean, what if they do exist? Even if they were, they can't do anything to you, Naruto. Well, I don't want a bunch of dead assholes hanging around watching me poo. Ino spluttered out a mouthful of wine as she cackled at her date's distressed retort. The picture of a couple hundred dead spirits trying to squeeze themselves in a stall with Naruto squatting over the toilet sent her into stitches. Naruto continued to pout as the pretty mind walker fought to regain her breath. After reducing it to a handful of giggles, Ino reached for another refill of the tasty red wine only to have a few drops come out. Ah, she said with a crestfallen face. I think that's enough drinking for the moment, said Naruto gently as he took the now empty bottle of liquor out of her hands. You can never have too much alcohol, contradicted Ino with a childish glower. She shivered slightly as the cool night air blew against her exposed skin. Damn, she could feel her getting hard. Sneaking a peek at Naruto to see if he had noticed, she was startled by her own disappointment when it appeared he hadn't. Seriously, what was wrong with her? Oh yeah, you remember what happened the last time we got drunk? He asked with a sly grin, the whisker marks adding to his foxy expression. Heat crept into her skin as she blushed attractively. Oh yes, Ino remembered, vividly. Shit, her were getting harder. No way he wasn't going to notice now. Why did she decide to wear the thin lacy bra again? Fine, she pouted. Naruto glanced at his timepiece and frowned slightly. Well, it seems we have a decision to make, Ino-chan. Oh yeah, the Yamanaka leaned forward on the table with her head propped on one arm, making sure to angle herself so that plenty of cleavage was exposed. A smirk graced her lips when Naruto took a glance down at the open invitation, then doubled back for another peek when he noticed her predicament caused by the chilly air. She preened internally as she watched him swallow visibly before tearing his eyes away from her chest area, appreciative smile curving his lips. It's 10:30 at the moment. If we leave now, I can get you home a little after 11 o'clock, probably at an hour that won't have your father camping out at my apartment waiting to slit my throat. But, she asked eagerly. Ino was having a great time and she wasn't ready for the night to be over just yet. Naruto smiled warmly as he reached a hand out across the table, palm up. Ino placed her hand across his and returned his grin when he closed his hands around hers. But I'm having a lot of fun with you tonight and I'd love to spend more time with you if you'd like the same, he continued, fingers intertwining with hers. Ino bit her lip in silent contemplation. Part of her was very keen to carry on with their date, to explore where this growth in their relations would lead. She felt like she had gotten to know a bit more of the real Naruto, the side he rarely showed anyone, not even Sakura. Plus, he was just an all-around fun guy to hang out with. Naruto had already heaped surprise after surprise on her tonight, no doubt he probably had something else planned. Yet the eagerness was also what made the decision so difficult. She was having the time of her life, enamored with his charisma and more than a little drunk. Letting this continue was dangerous, because she knew all too well how it might end if she let it. And every minute she spent in his company was making it that much easier for her to allow herself to let go. You'd risk daddy skinning you alive just to have a bit more time with me? She asked softly, searching his eyes for deceit. Plenty of boys had claimed similar things in the past, but when push came to shove it had all been empty boasting to impress her. They eyes were the best measure of honesty, Even the best liars couldn't avoid the natural ticks in the window to their souls, not unless they were sociopaths. Ino was relatively certain Naruto wasn't a sociopath. I'd take on all of Odo for one more minute with you, Ino-chan, he whispered huskily. His gaze was unwavering, no hesitation present. Belly warm with wine and fuzzy feelings that needed further exploration, Ino graced him with a heartfelt smile, mind made up. All right, Uzumaki, you get to enjoy a few more hours of my company.